I never believed in the idea that someone could just know you, you know? Like really know you without all the obvious questions and awkward getting to know you conversations. I thought that was just something people said in movies or wrote about in books. But then Theo started bringing me coffee every morning, and I realized I'd been wrong about a lot of things. It started on a Tuesday in September. I remember because I'd just moved into this new apartment downtown, and I was running late for work at the architecture firm where I'd landed my first real job after graduation. I was that specific kind of stressed, where your shoulders are up around your ears, and you're mentally calculating if you have time to stop for coffee, or if you should just suffer through the morning with whatever stale break room situation awaited me. I was standing at the elevator in my building, stabbing the down button like that would somehow make it arrive faster when this guy walked up next to me. I'd seen him around the building a few times. Hard not to notice him, honestly. He had this presence about him, not in an intimidating way, but in that way some people just seem more solid than everyone else, more there. Dark hair that was always slightly messy, like he'd run his hands through it. Sharp jawline. These incredibly warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. I'd caught myself staring at him in the mailroom once, and had to pretend I was really fascinated by a package label. So we're standing there, waiting for the elevator, and he's holding two coffee cups, and I'm trying not to obviously look at him, while also being very aware of exactly how close he's standing. Then he just turns to me and holds out one of the cups and says, "Here, you look like you could use this." And I'm standing there like an idiot because who just gives a stranger coffee? But he's got this easy smile, and he says, "I'm Theo, by the way. I live on the fourth floor, and I always buy two coffees because I can never decide if I want one or two, so you'd actually be doing me a favor." Which was obviously a lie, a really transparent lie. But it was such a kind lie that I took the coffee and told him my name was Adrian, and thanked him. The elevator arrived, and we rode down together in this comfortable silence. And when we got to the lobby, he just waved and headed off toward the subway station while I walked the other direction to my office. I didn't think much of it. Random act of kindness from a neighbor. Nice story to tell at happy hour. Except the next morning, there he was again. Same time, same spot by the elevators. Two coffee cups in hand. He saw me coming and held one out with this grin and said, "Fancy meeting you here." And the thing that got me, the thing that made my stomach do this weird little flip, was that the coffee was exactly how I liked it. Medium roast, little bit of cream, no sugar. I hadn't told him that. The day before, I'd just accepted whatever he handed me and drank it on my walk to work. But somehow this coffee was perfect. I asked him how he knew, and he just shrugged and said he was good at reading people. And then the elevator came, and we had another one of those comfortable, quiet rides down to the lobby. That became our routine. Every single morning, Theo was there with two coffees. And every single morning, one of them was exactly what I needed. We'd ride down together, sometimes chatting about nothing important, sometimes just existing in that easy silence. He worked from home, he told me, doing something with graphic design and freelance consulting. He'd go out to get coffee because it forced him to leave the apartment and interact with humans at least once a day. After about 2 weeks of this, I realized I was waking up earlier than I needed to. I was picking out my clothes more carefully. I was taking an extra minute with my hair. I told myself it was just about being presentable, about looking professional for work. But I knew I was lying. I was doing it for those 5 minutes in the elevator with Theo. A month in, we started talking more. Real conversations. He told me about growing up in Seattle, about his parents who ran a bookstore, about how he'd moved to the city because he wanted to be somewhere that felt alive. I told him about my family upstate, about my dad who'd wanted me to take over his construction business, about how choosing architecture had felt like a betrayal and a liberation at the same time. We talked about movies and music and the weird guy on the third floor who only wore purple. Theo did this thing where he'd listen like what you were saying was the most interesting thing he'd heard all day. He'd lean in slightly, maintain eye contact, ask follow-up questions that showed he was actually paying attention. I started noticing things about him. The way he'd tap his thumb against his coffee cup when he was thinking. How he'd bite his lower lip when he was trying not to laugh at something. The small scar above his left eyebrow that I wanted to ask about, but never did. How good he smelled. Like cedar and something citrusy. How his hand would sometimes brush against mine when he handed me the coffee. And how that brief contact would stay with me for hours afterward. Around month 3, I had to admit to myself what was happening. I was falling for him. Not the dramatic movie version where you suddenly realize it all at once. It was gradual, like water slowly filling a container you didn't know was empty. I'd be at work, sketching out building elevations and find myself thinking about something funny he'd said that morning. I'd be out with friends and someone would make a joke and I'd think about how Theo would have laughed at that. I started staying up too late because I knew if I went to sleep earlier, I'd just wake up earlier. And then I'd be that guy lurking in the hallway waiting for my neighbor to show up with coffee, like some kind of desperate character from a romantic comedy. The problem was I had no idea if Theo felt anything beyond neighborly friendliness. Sure, he brought me coffee every day, but maybe that was just who he was. Maybe he was one of those genuinely kind people who do nice things without any ulterior motive. I'd never been good at reading signals. In college, I'd missed about a dozen obvious hints from people who were interested in me because I just assumed everyone was being friendly. And with Theo, the stakes felt higher. He was my neighbor. If I misread this and made it weird, I'd have to see him in the hallway and the mailroom and feel that awkward tension every single day. But there were moments, little things that made me wonder, like how he'd remember tiny details I'd mentioned in passing. I'd mentioned once that I was working on a design proposal for a community center, and 2 weeks later he asked how it went. And I'd completely forgotten I'd even told him about it. All the time I came down with the flu and didn't show up for our morning coffee for 3 days, and when I finally emerged from my apartment looking like death, there was a care package outside my door. Soup, crackers, cold medicine, and a note in Theo's handwriting that said, "The elevator rides have been boring without you. Feel better soon." I kept that note, put it in my desk drawer at work, and would look at it sometimes when I needed to feel something. Month 6 rolled around and we'd expanded beyond just elevator rides. We'd run into each other at the corner bodega and end up walking back together. We'd see each other doing laundry in the building's basement and fold clothes while talking. Once, we both ended up at the same coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon, him working on his laptop, me sketching. And we ended up spending 4 hours at the same table, just existing in each other's space. It felt domestic in a way that made my chest ache. I started wondering if I should just tell him. Just be direct and honest and say, "Hey, I have feelings for you, and if you don't feel the same way, that's fine, but I needed to say it." But every time I worked up the courage, I'd lose it. I'd see him smiling at me over his coffee cup and think about how perfect this routine was, how it was the best part of my day, and I couldn't risk losing it. My best friend Marcus told me I was being an idiot. We were at a bar after work, and I was on my 3rd beer, and apparently had started talking about Theo without realizing it. Marcus just looked at me and said, "Adrian, the man brings you coffee every single day. He remembers everything you tell him. He left you soup when you were sick. Either he's into you, or he's training to be a professional best friend. And I don't think that's a real career path. Just tell him." But I couldn't. Not yet. Month 9. Fall had turned to winter, had turned to spring. The coffee continued. Our conversations got longer. We started texting occasionally. Stupid stuff mostly. Memes, observations about our building's increasingly bizarre maintenance issues, recommendations for shows to watch. Once he texted me at 2 in the morning because he couldn't sleep. And we ended up having this long conversation about what we'd do if we won the lottery. He said he'd buy his parents' bookstore building so they'd never have to worry about rent increases. I said I'd design and build affordable housing because everyone deserves a home that feels safe. He texted back, "That's the most you thing you've ever said." And I stared at that message for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what it meant. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Thursday in June, almost exactly a year since that first coffee. I was running late because I'd been up until 3, finishing a project proposal. I stumbled to the elevator, looking like I'd been dragged through a hedge backward, and there was Theo, same as always, 2 coffee cups in hand. But something was different. He looked nervous. His usual easy confidence seemed shaky. He handed me the coffee, and I took it and thanked him, and we got on the elevator. But instead of the comfortable silence or easy conversation, there was this tension. I could see him fidgeting with his cup. That thumb-tapping thing he did, but faster. More anxious. We were halfway down when he just blurted out, "I need to tell you something." My heart stopped. This was it. He was moving away. Or he'd met someone. Or he was going to tell me he couldn't do the coffee thing anymore because his girlfriend thought it was weird. I braced myself. He took a breath and said, "I've been bringing you coffee every morning for almost a year now, and you've never once asked me why. And I kept waiting for you to ask because I thought it would be easier if you asked, but you never did. So I'm just going to tell you. I bring you coffee because it's an excuse to see you. Because you're the best part of my morning. The best part of my day, honestly. Because I know exactly how you take your coffee because I pay attention to everything about you. Because I've been falling for you since probably the second week, and I've been too scared to say anything because what if I was wrong? What if you didn't feel the same way? And I didn't want to lose these mornings with you." The elevator reached the lobby and the doors opened, but neither of us moved. I was staring at him, and he was staring at me, and I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that he'd just ruined everything. I said, "You've been falling for me." Not a question, just a statement, because I needed to hear it again. Needed to make sure I hadn't imagined it. He nodded. "Since forever," he said quietly. "I bring you coffee because I'm in love with you, Adrian. And I have been for a really long time. And I'm sorry if that makes things weird, but I couldn't keep pretending anymore." The elevator doors started to close and I stuck my hand out to stop them. My coffee was shaking in my other hand. I said, "Theo, I've been in love with you since month 3. I've been showing up to this elevator every morning hoping you'd be here. I've been living for these 5-minute rides and our stupid text conversations and every tiny interaction we have. I thought I was the only one feeling this way." His face did this thing. This transformation from nervous to hopeful to absolutely radiant. He stepped closer to me and said, "Really?" And I laughed because it was such an absurd question given everything he'd just said, everything I'd just admitted. "Really?" I said. "I'm completely gone for you. Have been for months." He reached out and took my free hand, laced his fingers through mine, and it felt like every morning of handed coffee cups and brushed fingers had been leading to this moment. He said, "Can I kiss you?" I nodded because words seemed inadequate, and he leaned in and kissed me right there in the elevator lobby of our building, both of us still holding our coffee cups. And it was perfect. He tasted like coffee and mint and something that was just him. And when we finally broke apart, I was grinning like an idiot, and so was he. We ended up being late to everything that day because we stood in that lobby talking for another hour. Really talking about all the moments we'd both been too scared to make a move. about how we'd each been convinced the other person was just being friendly, about how Marcus was going to be insufferably smug when I told him he'd been right. Theo told me about the first morning he'd seen me, how I'd been wearing this ratty college sweatshirt and looked exhausted but smiled at the barista anyway, and he'd thought I was the most beautiful person he'd ever seen. I told him about catching myself staring at him in the mailroom and feeling like a creep. That was a year ago now. We still do the coffee thing every morning, except now Theo comes to my apartment, or I go to his, and we have coffee together before starting our days. Sometimes we don't make it to the elevator at all because we get distracted, kissing in the kitchen or talking about our plans for the weekend or just existing in each other's space in that way that still feels domestic and perfect. Last week, Shio asked me to move in with him. Well, technically, he asked if I wanted to consolidate our coffee supplies because we were both buying the same beans and it seemed inefficient. And when I laughed, he got serious and said he wanted to wake up next to me every morning, wanted our whole lives to be as easy and right as those elevator rides had been. I said yes before he finished asking. I think about that first morning sometimes, how I was stressed and running late, and this beautiful man just handed me coffee, like it was the most natural thing in the world. How he somehow knew exactly what I needed, without me saying a word. How he kept showing up, every single day, because he was falling in love with me, and didn't know how else to say it. People talk about love languages and grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but sometimes love is just showing up. It's paying attention. It's learning how someone takes their coffee and bringing it to them every morning for a year because you want to see them smile. It's being brave enough to finally say the thing you've been feeling even when you're terrified of the answer. Theo brought me coffee every morning for a year and never asked how I take it because he already knew. He knew because he paid attention, because he cared, because he was learning me the way you learn a favorite song, memorizing every note and rhythm until it becomes part of you. And in the process of learning me, I was learning him too. Learning that love doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly, consistently, in the form of a paper cup and a warm smile, and 5 minutes in an elevator that somehow contain everything you've been looking for. We're getting married next spring. Theo's parents are hosting the reception at their bookstore in Seattle. Marcus is going to be my best man, and he's already promised his speech will include the phrase, "I told you so." And on our wedding morning, I know exactly what's going to happen. Theo's going to bring me coffee, exactly how I like it. Because that's who he is. That's who we are. Two people who found each other in an elevator and built a love story one morning. One coffee, one quiet moment at a time.